Kansai, I'm Kristen Ashkate. Welcome to APTN National News. A series of violent incidents, delays in response times, police response times, and the presence of organized crime have led to a First Nation in Northern Ontario declaring a state of emergency. Dennis Ward is here with some of the details.
Thanks, Kristen. Leadership from Netamizigaming, Nishnabeg First Nation, also known as Pic-Mobert, were at the Ontario Legislature today demanding basic safety, security, and access to the services other communities across the province already receive. The First Nation, located roughly 370 kilometers east of Thunder Bay on the north shore of Lake Superior, says drug trafficking by gangs has increased rates of addiction, overdoses, sex trafficking, and violent crime. Leadership also says suicide rates are rising. They laid out a series of incidents, including a young man being held at gunpoint and being beaten, and it taking 4 hours for a community response. The First Nation says it has incurred $5 million in debt while trying to respond to the crisis. Ontario NDP Deputy Leader Saul Mamakwa said in a release that, quote, "Once again, we are seeing a First Nation in Ontario in crisis because the government does not hold public safety in First Nations to the same standard as anywhere else in the province." We hope to have more for you on this story tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern Time.
Thank you, Dennis. The members of a northwestern Ontario First Nation have voted in favor of potentially being the location of a deep geological repository for Canada's nuclear waste. The Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation near Dryden says they have been involved in the decision-making process for 12 years. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization is in the process of selecting a $26 billion site for the project this year. If it goes ahead, millions of bundles of spent nuclear fuel will be stored in underground rooms and tunnels. The Town Council of Indigenous and the Municipality of South Bruce voted in favor of hosting the site earlier this year. In a statement, the Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation said, "This yes vote does not signify approval of the project. Rather, it demonstrates the nation's willingness to enter the next phase of in-depth environmental and technical assessments to determine safety and site suitability. As Anishinaabe, we have a sacred relationship with the land, and we have a sacred duty to protect the land for all of our relations and generations yet to come." The Saugeen Ojibwe Nation northeast of Sioux Lookout is the last community in the area that still needs to have input before a site is selected. The project, if approved, has promised jobs and economic development. Meanwhile, those opposed are concerned about the long-term environmental and health impacts on the environment, including people and wildlife in the area. Manitoba RCMP have arrested 3 people and seized a considerable amount of drugs and cash from a home in northeastern part of the province. On Sunday, November 17th, Shamattawa RCMP executed a search warrant on a home in Bear Avenue in Kissimatawa First Nation as part of an ongoing drug trafficking investigation. Police seized cocaine, Oxycontin, Xanax, and numerous other illicit pills. More than $40,000 in cash was also seized. Police arrested 3 people, a 23-year-old male and 2 females between the ages of 30 and 39. They are from the community and remain in police custody. Shamattawa RCMP are still investigating. More and more community-based mental health response services are emerging across Canada. Instead of deploying police officers or emergency personnel, people with lived experience and specialized de-escalation training is becoming a growing need. Reporter Sierra Bettens takes a look at how other parts of Canada are addressing the issue.
This week marks 3 months since the Alternative Neighbourhood Crisis Response, or ANCHOR, launched in Ottawa's Centretown neighbourhood. By calling 211, residents can request on-the-ground support from ANCHOR crisis workers. Project manager Marissa Delia Ellis says the service meets people where they're at.
Earlier, not necessarily seeing people as the crisis that they are in, but seeing people really as the determinants that have led them there just allows for a deeper level of care that sometimes might not be able to happen.
Anchor crisis workers receive over 200 hours of training. Ellis says most of the staff also have lived experience. Sage McMahon directs the Indigenous-led crisis response through the Toronto Community Crisis Service, or TCCS. The TCCS launched as a pilot in 2022 and expanded citywide in September this year.
This type of work really came out of a lot of community work that had happened for years and advocacy that had happened for years from Black and Indigenous, mostly communities who are advocating that folks really need an alternative response, and one that is based in community, one that is trauma-informed, has harm reduction services.
The Indigenous-led TCCS team is an 85-person mobile response crew dispatched to mental health calls. McMahon says an alternative to calling the police was needed.
When we look at, for instance, missing and murdered Indigenous women and Two-Spirit people and girls, our communities are quite under-policed. But then we also look and see that Indigenous folks are overrepresented in incarceration.
In Manitoba, the Alternative Response to Citizens in Crisis, or ARC program, pairs plainclothes police officers with mental health clinicians like Lucy Stebner. Since launching in 2021, Stebner says the team has helped over 90% of clients remain in the community rather than be transferred to the hospital.
Before ARC, police basically had two options: take them to the hospital involuntarily or attend the crisis response center, whereas now we're kind of doing that for the clients going to their own home or space and providing the help right there.
Last month, the Manitoba government said they were reviewing the Mental Health Act and examining ways to decrease the role of police. A Manitoba government spokesperson told APTN the review is still in progress. In a statement, that spokesperson said they recognize the need for appropriate mental health emergency responses, and groups such as Bear Clan Patrol, the Downtown Community Safety Partnership, and ARC will continue to be funded. John Hoyles is the Executive Director of Community Navigation of Eastern Ontario, which runs the Ottawa 211 line. He says the demand has been through the roof. He encourages other jurisdictions interested in establishing community-led mental health crisis services to, quote, go for it.
There's no question the need is there in terms of the volume of requests that we're, not volume of dispatches we're doing, the need is there. And it is such a much better community response to have people with lived experience, people that understand and have really good training on de-escalation.
Some provinces are already following suit. In late September, Nova Scotia dedicated $3.7 million to a 3-year community-based crisis response pilot program in the West Hants municipality. In a statement sent to APTN, a Nova Scotia Office of Addictions and Mental Health spokesperson said it's expected to launch in early 2025. Sierra Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
During Monday's question period, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre zeroed in on Canada's Employment Minister Randy Boissonnault's growing controversies, including his shifting claims about his Indigenous identity. The Conservatives are calling on him to resign.
We know he falsely claimed he was Indigenous in order so that his company could steal resources that were meant for real Indigenous people. And now his company address matches the address of a place that was the location of 2 cocaine busts. Any one of these things would be a resigning offense. Why won't he resign now?
I know the person referred to in today's article. I've never met that person. I've had no dealings with her whatsoever. Those are the facts.
Just days ago, Boissonnault apologized about his Indigenous identity claims. He said that he's sorry he wasn't as clear as he could have been. Journalist and author Tanya Talaga has been on the road touring her new book, The Knowing. That story when we come back. Welcome back. Tanya Talaga has been writing about Indigenous issues for 3 decades. The Anishinaabe journalist started at the Toronto Star in the 1990s. In more recent years, she's become a columnist at the Globe and Mail. Talaga has also wrote 4 books, including her latest one, The Knowing. She's currently on a cross-country book tour that passed through the prairies over the weekend. Talaga recently sat down with our TR Wheatley in Winnipeg to talk about the book, her career, and the path of reconciliation.
It's my recent book right here. And it's called The Knowing. And this book took me quite a long time to write. And it was actually started by my uncle Hank. And it was my mom who was constantly asking me to find Annie. Annie was her great-grandma. My mom is 80, and she said to me, you know, Tanya, you're the journalist. You should be the one doing this. All I had was a death certificate that said that she was a patient at the Ontario Hospital. And in 1930 is when she went into the Ontario Hospital, and the death certificate said she died in 1937. I didn't know how many children she had had before she had Liz, my great-grandma. We found out that Annie, her last name was Carpenter, and that she is from Petabic, Fort Albany First Nation along the James Bay coast. I found out so much more about Annie and her struggle, and what it was like for her living through those years of the Indian Act. The book is about my search for her and how she really represents, in so many ways, the lost children, the stolen children, our family members that are gone. Because it was kids at Indian residential schools that disappeared, but our people also disappeared in tuberculosis sanitaria. They disappeared in Indian hospitals and in asylums.
Talks a bit about reconciliation as well.
The TRC, part of the reason why it was written was to sort of give everyone else a push, right, to go out there and to do this work. In 2015, everyone was talking about genocide. You know, oh my gosh, they've used the word genocide. And so I actually wanted to write a book then. When I pitched Seven Fallen Feathers, my first book, to my publisher at the time, and my editor said, write Seven Fallen Feathers first, and then write this book. And then when Kamloops happened, it became apparent to me that it was all the same story. It's also interwoven.
Yeah, similar with my great-great-grandma as well. Because I grew up with my great-grandma, and she always told us stories about her mom. We don't really know. We know she spent time in a sanitarium. We know she was found on train tracks. Indigenous families, sadly, that, you know, this, yes, it's the children too, but it's also this missing and murdered epidemic as well.
It's all intertwined. And that's the thing that we understand as Indigenous people, but Canada doesn't really get that. I mean, maybe they're starting to get it now because we've been screaming about it long enough, and you know, how many inquiries and commissions have we talked about this and tried to show everyone the web.
And you also did a documentary?
I wanted to document this as well. You know, I was a journalist at Kamloops when the Lestwaywe, the 215, were first announced, and I thought to myself, I have to record this. So I came back a year later for the 1-year anniversary of Lestwaywe, and it was there that we recorded things. I mean, I just started to blindly, like, honestly start recording things because I knew I would use it at some point. And I also knew that there are people that will only watch the 4-part documentary series.
How long were you doing journalism? And kind of just the evolution of reconciliation. I mean, at one point you're in the Toronto Star. They've had some questionable stories in the past about Indigenous people.
Well, I was a journalist at the Toronto Star. I started in 1995. And being a journalist in 1995 was a bit different than now. There was not acceptance really for our stories. It got better once social media came onto the scene, once Idle No More. But it was still hard. It was still hard being a First Nations person working with all non-First Nations people. Well, I wrote Seven Fallen Feathers because I'd been writing stories about the 7 youth And I started writing those stories in 2011 when I was a parliamentary reporter at Queen's Park. And so I wrote Seven Fallen Feathers in 2016. I wrote 2 books on genocide. And I also covered murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. I was a witness as well at the National Inquiry. I remember seeing we had an editorial at the Toronto Star that said, no, it's not genocide. And I couldn't believe it when I saw that. And it was really hard to be in that environment, you know, especially when you know that it is genocide, that we're still seeing the after effects. And so eventually there was a buyout offered at the Star, and I took it. I started Muckwell Creative, which is our a production company. We do documentaries and we do podcasts. And through that, I create my own newsrooms. And it was actually Murray Sinclair that told me, we all know what we need to do in our hearts and in our lives, and we just have to do it. And so getting that push out of the Star was good for me.
I just want to thank you for the conversation.
Oh, thank you.
It went pretty fast.
Tonight on an all-new episode of Face to Face, we speak with Navajo News anchor and reporter Charlie Etzity. She is hosting the latest season of ABC Audio's Reclaimed series called The Lifeblood of Navajo Nation. It's about the largest Indigenous tribe in the U.S. and its struggle for clean drinking water.
Unfortunately, the Navajo Nation, this has been something that's been going on for decades. It's been a decades-long fight, but unfortunately, it's not unique to Navajo Nation. So many other Indigenous communities across the United States have their own issues and their own fights, and I really hope that people walk away with a better sense of what's happening in Native communities in 2024, and that they will educate themselves and, you know, maybe look to their elected officials and ask those important questions about what are we doing to help out our Indigenous communities across the U.S.
We now want to tell you about this week's web poll question. How confident are you in the check and balances when it comes to medical procedures at hospitals in your area? Your answers are very confident, somewhat confident, not confident at all, or unsure. Have your say at www.aptnnews.ca. A new Indigenous film that was made in Manitoba is being screened at the Whistler Film Festival. We'll speak to the creator behind the film after the break. Starting on the east, sunny in St. John's at 10, Charlottetown 6. Cartwright 4, Inujuak -2. Saguenay 6, Val-d'Or 4. 9 in Toronto, Sarnia 11. Wawa 4, Thunder Bay 7. God's Lake 1, Puckatawagan -5. Gimli 5, Dauphin 2. -5 in Regina, -5 in Saskatoon. Larange -9, Buffalo Narrows -11. -17 in High Level, Fort McMurray -13. -11 Medicine Hat, -11 in Red Deer. 6 in Penticton, Campbell River 9. -16 in Fort Nelson, Dees Lake -14. -31 in Old Crow, Rock River -23. -25 in Wati, Wrigley -21. -14 in Sax Harbor, Inuvik -20. -2 in Chesterfield, Baker Lake -10. And Clyde River -4, Arctic Bay -8. The 24th edition of the Whistler Film Festival is set to kick off on December 4th. There are a number of Indigenous-led films playing, including the world premiere of Lucky Strikes. Filmed in Manitoba, it's about a washed-up bowler who rekindles his competitive spirit when he teams up with his best friend to buy his late father's bowling alley. For more on the film, we're joined by writer-director Darcy Waite, who's in Vancouver. Darcy, thank you so much for being here. Can you tell us a little more about your film, Lucky Strikes?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an 80-minute comedy about two friends trying to buy their dad's bowling alley as they're kind of stuck in the mud, you know, about to get evicted, and it's their last chance to try to change their lives. And make a better life for themselves, and then they're thwarted by their their childhood nemesis, who's like a big real estate agent who's trying to buy the bowling alley so they don't get it, and it's a crazy ragtag wild comedy.
Nice. And can you tell us about, I guess, some of the background? Where did the idea for this film come from?
Yeah, I came up with it a couple of years ago when I just finished another show I did for APTN DJ Barbanic, and I was like, well, what's the next idea? And you're always wondering, like, oh, is that the best thing I've ever, it's going to be able to do? And I think my buddy invited me out to a bowling league. He's like, hey, I need an extra person for my team. And I was like, sure, I'll do it. And I remember like the first couple times I went, I was like looking around and I was like, this is a cool setting. Like, you have characters and like there's things like bowling lotions because like their hands need certain grip, and everyone has their little trinkets, and I was like, this is like bingo. Like you see the cookums with all their dabbers, and it was very it was a funny setting, and I was like, what would it be like to shoot a feature in a setting like this? So I slowly started to come up with the idea, and I was like, well, what if a young guy like me tries to buy it? And like, well, how much do they cost? And then it just totally started to kind of unravel over time, and I got really lucky, and I applied for some funding with Imagine Data, which is one of our Indigenous film festivals here in Canada, and I got lucky, and after that it was applying to the telefilm. We got some funding, and then it was going to camera, and it was a pretty quick after we got the script made, but it was a good experience. My first time doing it, so yeah.
That's great. And Darcy, you've been involved in many projects over the years, including a number on APTN like DJ Burnt Panic, which you were talking about there. But this is your feature film directorial debut. Can you talk about the lengthy process you had to do to get the film made?
Yeah, absolutely. It's writing a script isn't the easiest. You always think like, oh, I got an idea. You always have that writer friend who's like, I got this idea, and so it takes a little bit to get it to actually sit down and write it, and then you got to come up with the jokes and stuff, and but because of my producing background, I was able to get us funded pretty quickly. But then it was done. Shooting took a little bit longer than I thought it was going to take in post-production. So we've been doing it for the past year and a half. But it's been an amazing experience. It's been super fun. I'll never forget it. It's been awesome.
And Lucky Strikes is set to have its world premiere at the Whistler Film Festival here. What do you hope people take away from the film?
I just hope people can sit back after a long, hard day and watch a movie and get lost in the characters and have a great laugh, and because that's kind of my shows. Like I really enjoy slapstick comedy and comedy where you can just kind of forget about what's going on in the world and just have a good time, and because that's what I love to do at the end of the day. Is just put on some acting good and just get lost in those characters.
Well, Darcy, we really appreciate your time for talking with us today about your film, and we wish you all the best on the success of this film.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here.
That's your daytime newscast for this Tuesday, November 19th. Dennis Ward is back for your evening newscast. Make sure to join us in a few hours. From everyone at APTN National News, thank you for watching, and we'll see you again. Excellent.